Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. So welcome to our online lecture series titled Life, Healing and Community, a series that is organized by Hokkma College of General Education for all Ihwa students. My name is Hye-seok Shin. I teach at the Department of English Studies here at Ihwa, and I'll be hosting and moderating this afternoon's, it's still afternoon, isn't it? Afternoon's event, followed by a question from students. As you may note from the title of this lecture series, Life, Healing, and Community brings together some of the most important issues of our existence that are being, I think, increasingly threatened by a growing number of problems and challenges facing today. And if I may say so, we humans have been constructing and reshaping the world in terms of our convenience and purposefulness since the dawn of civilization. And we are led to assume and believe that this planet and environment is here only to serve as humans. Now we have to face a different reality of how our environments are also acting and challenging the exploitive nature of human life and culture, driven by the relentless spirit of progress and modernity. So with this note, I like to believe that the three key words that make up today's title of this lecture series, Life, Healing, and Community, are not only just for humans only, but for the earth itself and everything in it that make up this place so unique and irreplaceable. Tonight, around 300 students and faculty have joined us online. We would love to invite all of us, all our guests to our studio. However, due to the global pandemic that we're experiencing since the beginning of this year, my God, how long has it been, right? We have decided to hold our event online since the safety is what matters most. So here in our studio tonight, we have Dr. Hye-seok Kim, who's sitting next to me, president of Ihwa Women's University. Would you like to stand up and take a bow? Round of applause. Yes. And Professor Jung Jae-young, the Dean of Hokkma College of General Education, and Professor Ko Kwang-seok, Associate Dean of Hokkma College of General Education. These two people are the main figures who've been actually putting this together. So take a round of applause for Professor Jung Jae-young, Professor Ko Kwang-seok. And last but not least, the four students who represent the brilliant minds of Ihwa. Where are we? Okay, right there. Just would you like to say hello to all of us? We are rather sitting very quietly, nervous. So this very location that we are now at is the Ihwa campus complex. It's called ECC, which is the landmark building of Ihwa Women's University, and which is actually work by the renowned architect Dominique Perrault. So if you go to his webpage, this is still seen as the most representative works of today, right? And I wish I could give the speaker the tour of this beautiful building and show how this part of this campus is designed in the spirit of environment friendliness. So if you happen to be in Korea, make sure that you give me a call and I'll give you a nice round tour, okay? Well, thank you. All right. First, Professor Dr. Hye-seok Kim, the president of Ihwa Women's University, will give her welcoming remarks. Let's invite her with a warm round of applause.
네, 안녕하세요.
So she's giving her remarks in Korean.
Yeah, I will give my congratulatory remark in Korean. Please
right.
excuse me for doing that. I'm really happy and pleasant to meet you, Ms. Hoji, even though through online. It will be a very fruitful and meaningful experience for our students to attend your lecture and to have an experience of talking with you and discussing various issues you were interested in. 이화인 여러분, 이렇게 온라인으로 만나게 되어 반갑습니다. 캠퍼스를 가득 채우던 학생들이 썰물처럼 사라진 이 시점에서 이런 방식으로라도 여러분들과 연결될 수 있어서 정말 감사하게 생각을 하고 있습니다. 어려운 시점이지만 이럴 때일수록 자기 자신과 가족, 친구, 나아가 인류 모두의 생명이 얼마나 소중하고 귀중한 것인지를 지혜롭게 발견하는 시간이 되었으면 좋겠습니다. 코로나19가 우리의 일상세계를 송두리째 변화시켜 놓았습니다. 단순히 학습과 노동의 방식을 전환시키는 것뿐만 아니라 인간이 인간을 인지하는 방법마저 근본적으로 전환시켜 놓고 있는 것 같습니다. 지금 시점에서 코로나19를 경험하면서 우리는 단순히 백신만 개발되면 이 모든 일이 해결될 것이라고 낙관할 수가 없는 그런 시점인 것 같습니다. 많은 전문가들이 코로나19 바이러스가 인수공통 감염병이라는 점을 지적을 합니다. 문제는 인수공통 바이러스의 유행은 인류의 환경 파괴로 인한 기후위기, 아니 더 나아가서 기후재앙이라고 불러야 마땅한 지구의 현실과 분리될 수 없는 것이기에 앞으로도 어떠한 위기가 우리의 삶을 또 다시 위협할 수 있을지 모르겠다는 그런 것입니다. 시베리아와 캘리포니아의 광활한 숲의 나무들이 올해만도 수없이 불타 없어졌고 남극과 북극의 빙하가 줄어들고 있고 내노라 하는 세계의 고봉 꼭대기는 빙하들이 녹아 흘러내려서 거친 맨땅을 드러내놓고 있습니다. 또 온난화로 인해 오래 얼었던 그 동토들이 녹아서 이산화탄소가 배출되어서 우리 환경을 더 악화시키고 있다는 그런 뉴스를 듣고 있습니다. 많은 기후학자들이 2030년까지 현재 우리가 배출하는 온실가스의 45%를 절대적으로 낮추지 않으면 지구 스스로 생태 환경을 안정적으로 회복할 수 있는 티핑 포인트를 넘어서게 될 것이라고 말합니다. 그리고 그 결과 지구의 온도가 2100년에는 4.8도가 상승하는 비극을 결코 막을 수 없을 것이라고 경고합니다. 넉넉 잡고 말해도 우리에게는 겨우 10년이라는 최후의 시간이 남아 있을 뿐이라는 무서운 말인 것 같습니다. 이러한 위기의식을 분명히 할 때 이제 인간끼리의 문제만 놓고 고민하고 논쟁하는 시대가 이제 끝이 나야 될 것 같습니다. 인간이 저지른 생태적 범죄로 인해서 우리는 더 큰 관점에서 우리가 처한 문제들을 근본적으로 다시 성찰해야 할 때입니다. 다행히 우리에게는 오래전부터 이 문제에 관심을 갖고 시대의 예언자처럼 현대산업 문명의 탐욕에 대해 날카롭게 비판하는 지성인들이 있었습니다. 오늘 그런 분 중에 한 분으로서 전 세계적으로 존경받는 학자이자 동시에 이화교육에도 수회에 걸쳐 관심을 갖고 방문해 주신 헬레나 노르베리 호지 선생님을 포스트-코로나 출구에 대한 전환적 결단이 필요한 이 시점에서 다시 소개할 수 있게 되어서 큰 영광으로 생각합니다. 여러분들의 상당수가 호지 선생님의 그 유명한 저서 오래된 미래를 이미 고등학교 교과서에서 배워 익히 알고 있고 존경의 마음으로 이 강의를 신청한 것으로 알고 있습니다. 오늘날 우리가 당면한 생태위기 앞에 우리 이화인들은 우리 자신뿐만 아니라 인류와 지구 안에 거하는 모든 생명들을 위한 생태 문명의 전환적 사고를 학습하고 또 창조해야 할 것입니다. 이를 위해 정말로 여성 지식인들이 해야 할 일과 할 수 있는 일이 엄청나게 많이 있습니다. 이와 역시 이 전환의 시작으로부터 나눔 커뮤니티 가드닝이라는 수업을 지난 학기부터 시작해서 대학 교양교육에 도시농업을 접목시키고 생태 문명에 대한 새로운 정신과 방법을 직접 모색하고 있습니다. 오늘도 이 강연에서 이와 여러분들이 생명 감수성을 키우고 또 생태 문명 전환의 필요성을 충분히 깨달을 수 있었으면 좋겠습니다. 이화대학의 이런 교육 철학과 변화에 대한 의지를 충분히 이해하고 멀리서 온라인으로 강연을 해주시게 된 호지 선생님께 진심으로 감사의 말씀을 전합니다. I really thank you for this opportunity and hope that we will meet after Corona and someday our students will welcome you a lot. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, President Kim, for the wonderful opening remarks. Now, I would like to briefly introduce our very special guest speaker, Helena Norberg-Hodge. She's a pioneer of the New Economy movement and recipient of the Alternative Nobel Prize, the Arthur Morgan Award, and the Goy Peace Prize for contributing to the revitalization of cultural and biological diversity and the strengthening of local communities and economies worldwide. She's the author of this inspirational classic that President Kim just mentioned, Ancient Futures, which came out in 1991, which is a book that's been widely read by all the students who joined us today. The reason they are here because they are so excited that you are here with us, although it's unfortunately virtually, because they read you. So I'm sure they have very, very interesting questions they wanted to ask after your talk. And also, the most recent publication includes Local is Our Future, excuse me, in 2019, just last year. She's a co-author of Bringing the Food Economy Home and From the Ground Up, and the producer of the award-winning documentary, The Economics of Happiness. I believe that today's talk is based on this particular work that she recently finished. I hope I'm right. Helena is a founder and a director of Local Futures, previously known as the International Society for Ecology and Culture, and the International Alliance for Localization, and a founding member of the International Commission on the Future of Food and Agriculture, and the International Forum on Globalization and Global Eco-Village Network. So we know that whatever she does it for the sake of us as a member of these global communities. Okay, thank you for joining us once again from Australia. Big round of applause for our speaker today. So you can start.
All right. Thank you very, very much. It's a real honor to be able to speak to you tonight my time. And I first of all want to remind you that you belong to a country that is among the most well-read countries in the world. Apparently you have a higher rate per capita of people actually reading and thinking over issues than in any other country. You belong to an exceptional country that I really see as a leader in a movement towards coming back to a balance with nature, and very importantly, also rebuilding the community fabric, the social fabric. And in so doing, these two goals of achieving a better balance with nature and reweaving the fabric of social connection, community connection, you are also promoting an economics of happiness. And economics of happiness is perhaps a bit too narrow. What we're really talking about is genuine well-being, human well-being, happiness, and good health, physical health, mental health. And we are recognizing that our individual health is completely linked to what is happening around us, what's happening in our society, what's happening to the natural world around us. So there's a huge turning going on in the world, a turning towards that regeneration, that rebuilding, that genuine concern for the well-being of people and the planet. However, in order to ensure that we move as societies in that direction, we do need to pay attention to the economy. We need to recognize that the economy, the modern economy, from the very beginning, was based on slavery, was based on force. the modern economic system started hand in hand with a very destructive expansion across the world from Europe, and particularly in Britain, very clearly, part and parcel of that was driving people away from the land into big cities to become cheap labor. At the same time, on the other side of the world, people were being driven away from producing a range of things for themselves to stand in cotton plantations, tea plantations, in monocultures where they produced for export, produced for the big traders, the global traders. At the same time, economic theory came up with the idea of comparative advantage. Now, comparative advantage said it doesn't make sense to produce a range of things for your own country, for your own region, for your community. Move away from diversity, diversified production from your region to monoculture, to specialize for export. That is the founding principle of the modern economy, is encouraging a shift away from self-reliance to a dependence on monocultural production for export. Now, as we look back, we need to realize that most of the social and environmental crises we face come from that system that started in force. I don't know how much you're hearing in South Korea about also the recognition that the founders of this economy, these big wealthy traders, they were very explicitly also misogynist. There was a very clear and written and spoken assumption that women were inferior, that other people were inferior. So it was a misogyny, a racism, and at the same time, complete disrespect for nature, for animals, for the living world. Those hundreds of years ago, sort of building up to around the 1700s, those values were spelled out by the leaders in this new economic miracle. Today, unfortunately, we have a global economic market, a global economic system, which has actually continued to move in the same direction. Now, for hundreds of years, what has been encouraged is a rejection of diversified production for the needs of your regional country to specialize for export. As we did that, in the industrialized world, we remained unconscious of the fact that we were embarking on a new state of human production and ways of being, which became an urban information economy. The economy changed to focus on information, no longer on production of food, of fiber for clothing, of building materials, but instead on information. Today, we are moving on to another level of an information economy linked to a financialization of the economy. I believe that in order to understand why we have so many problems and also to find the key to real health, how do we actually find our way to the cure, to the real rebuilding of health and well-being, we need to understand that bigger picture. And we need to step back We need to step back and look at what I call the need for big picture activism. Big picture activism is the stepping back to really look at the connected web of problems that we face, to trace back to the root causes, the fundamental causes. In our research, in my organization, and in my network of people around the world, we have become very clear about the fact that it's the economic system that we must focus on to understand why we have climate crisis, an extinction of species, everyday loss of biodiversity, why democracy seems to be just a faint memory. It's become a fraud, it's become a theater, it's become so linked to money, why it is that the media no longer seems to be responsible, and why it is that we have an increase in fundamentalism, fear, and epidemics of anxiety, depression, and addiction. All of these problems are linked to this economic system. Now, some of you will know that my focus on this, this big picture, came from arriving in Ladakh in 1975 and finding a culture that had not been affected by this global economic system. It was one of the few places in the world where neither the Christian missionaries, who were forerunners to the traders, in the early days they worked with the global traders to colonize people's worldview and their values, and essentially to create a sense that people were inferior if they weren't following the European Christian view of the world. Ladakh had been spared that influence. There had been missionaries, but they had only succeeded in converting a few orphans. So the Ladakhis had been allowed to continue along their own path with their own worldview, their own local knowledge system, developing ways of living in a very harsh and difficult environment. I won't spend too much time on this because I hope many of you are familiar with it. But it's just to say that what I saw in Ladakh then was a very rare situation. At the time that I arrived in 1975, to have an economy, a culture, a people that were still deeply self-respecting and still more in control of their lives was a remarkable situation. It wasn't a perfect paradise. You and I might not want to live without any heating in the winter. Temperatures dropped to very low, the lowest inhabited, the temperatures dropped to -40. But there was a remarkable well-being, a remarkable health, physical health, and certainly a complete absence of the sort of poverty that we see in most of the world today, including America. There was no debt, there was no hunger. What I, in the mid-70s, experienced was this, and then I saw how, with the opening up to the outside global economy, suddenly things were being brought in, transported over the Himalayas, sometimes for weeks, and they would sell for half the price of local things. And this was particularly surprising when it came to food. So butter transported for about 10 days over the Himalayas was costing half the price of local butter. I, from that experience, ended up over the ensuing years doing studies around the world, and I found that everywhere I went, this remarkable inversion of the economy meant that people in in Kenya, in Mongolia, in England, in Australia, I found that everywhere the price of imported butter was between a quarter of the price to half the price of local butter. Now, butter is something that's perishable and is ideally kept fresh, but it wasn't just butter. I was alerted to the fact that we had a mad, wasteful use of fossil fuels because our governments were aiding global trade, international trade, and punishing local and national businesses. They were actually so blindly following the idea of comparative advantage, of supporting what they thought was their global corporations, that they were ending up using our taxes to subsidize not just the infrastructure for global trade, not just a media that supported this, but also even subsidizing them to advertise abroad, using aid as a way of supporting their own corporations having a foothold in countries like India and parts of Africa, so-called third world, so-called poor countries. In the meanwhile, in their own countries, any and every business that was place-based or local was squeezed for taxes and punished with heavy regulation. The global businesses were being deregulated in the name of free trade treaties. And these free trade treaties included clauses that said, we will not do anything. We, the government, will not do anything that might reduce your profit-making potential in our country. So England, America, South Korea, Australia were signing on to trade treaties where they promised foreign banks and corporations that they would make sure that they could make profit in their country. And that if they did anything that might threaten their profit, like raise the minimum wage or raise the environmental standards, then the corporations could take governments to court. And those courts were run essentially by corporations. Lawyers who in the morning would represent Monsanto and in the afternoon supposedly represent South Korea or the UK. This is a crazy inversion of what every society, what every human being, if they stop to think about it, if they stop to look at the big picture, this is crazy. And it's completely anti-democratic. It is also responsible for countries importing and exporting the same product. The US exports today, it's about 1.5 billion tons of beef, and they turn around and import about 1.5 billion tons of beef a year. Now, the UK is exporting as much milk and butter as it imports, and at the same time as we have the craziness of importing and exporting the same product, we have food being flown across the world to be processed. So from Norway, they fly fish to China to be deboned. From Australia, they fly fish to be deboned. From Australia, they fly nuts to be cracked open in China, all to be flown back to the other countries. England flies apples to South Africa to be washed and to be flown back again. This is going on all around the world. When I first discovered in Ladakh that butter coming in over the Himalayas was costing half as much, and I started doing this study and trying to understand what was happening in different countries, when I went back to my native Sweden, I found that at that time, and this would have been in about 1977, the Swedes were sending potatoes to Italy by road in big trucks to be washed, put in plastic bags, and then taken back again by road. That was just as crazy. Why couldn't Sweden wash its own potatoes? Why can't England wash its own apples? And what is this doing to climate change? I think it's very, very important that you women start looking at this issue and speaking out about it, studying it more. Unfortunately, there isn't so much written because in a tragic way, the whole world has become so dependent on big business, and that includes the environmental movement, that so much of the funding has been contributed by big business leaders, CEOs of many corporations that genuinely want to do better and genuinely want to try to heal the environment. I am convinced, having met with many CEOs, many ministers in many governments, that the problem we face today is not so much a problem of values. It's not so much a problem of bad people and good people, and some people being more greedy and other people being noble and not greedy. I see a planet where most people today are feeling very pressured to just pay for the rent or keep a roof over their head, provide education for their children, have a sort of normal life. It costs a lot of money. More and more people are in debt. More and more people are worried about their economic security. People who earn very big salaries are expected in their culture to own many houses, to have big yachts, and to have very fancy parties for their colleagues and for their business partners. Of course, one can say that CEOs that are earning millions a year, many millions in many cases, could or should be less greedy, and that the average small business person or the average farmer is being very badly treated. I think that's absolutely true. But what I'm absolutely convinced of is that the main reason this system is continuing essentially in the same direction that it started, with that assumption that we must specialize for export and we're going to grow the economy through more global trade. We don't need to maintain any kind of self-reliance. That was the fundamental assumption in the modern economy, and that has been allowed to continue to accelerate and to create the madness of importing and exporting the same thing. Many economists I talk to are not aware of this. When I try to tell them, they say, no, that's not what's supposed to be happening. No. And unfortunately, many environmentalists, even in Greenpeace and these organizations concerned with climate change, they have not been helped to step back and look at the issue globally. This is our big problem. As I see it, very, very few people have had the unusual experience that I had of a culture that had been outside of the impact of the global economy, and seeing it suddenly open up and seeing these dramatic changes, which then led me to look around the world, partly also because when I wrote my book, Ancient Futures, and when we made a film by the same title, Ancient Futures, they were translated between them into almost 50 languages. So I was invited to come to Laos, to Mongolia, to Kenya, to work with people in Bolivia. So there was a lot of interest from around the world. And partly I was already very cosmopolitan. I was Swedish, English, German. I had lived in America. I was actually living in Paris. when I was invited to go to Ladakh. I spoke quite a few languages. So from this international point of departure, the Ladakh experience became this way of studying what was happening in the rest of the world. What I see now is that most of the people who operate globally have a vested interest in continuing with this globalizing trend. They're often business people. They benefit from having a so-called poor country selling to a rich country. They benefit from this swapping, and they are not going to be the ones to do the research that's going to question their businesses or their foundations. Most environmentalists, most social activists, activists concerned about the widening gap between rich and poor, activists concerned about the mental health crisis, which you really must know, we have a mental health crisis accelerating in every country. It's quite serious in your country, with many people committing suicide, many people feeling depressed, but it is on the increase in every country. In Ladakh, suicide was something that would maybe happen one in a generation. It was so rare. With the modern changes, it is now roughly one a month. Actually, it's accelerating, and almost always young people. So there's a certain black and white nature to the situation once you step back and look at the big picture. I'm trying to see how much time I have now.
You have plenty of time. It's very interesting, yes.
Yeah. So I just want to reiterate that stepping back to try to understand the situation from a global perspective is vital. Absolutely vital. It's not easy to do. And I actually do encourage people who want to work to bring well-being to nature and society. I have been urging people to travel. I think it's been very beneficial for those kind of people to understand better what's going on in the world. Now, we don't know when we'll be able to travel again. And there is so much that we can do by making use of the internet and by more actively trying to learn and to communicate across our national boundaries. But this international exchange and collaboration is essential. Many people think that if you're promoting localization, you would not be in favor of travel, you would not be in favor of global or international collaboration. But on the contrary, we are absolutely convinced that it is essential for us both to understand the situation better and then also to collaborate for change. Now, the changes that we can make are at two key levels. We see the general discourse, the sort of in most countries now, the discussion is very much on the individual and on the national politics. The individual is being pressured a lot in a way that I see as very unfair. There's a lot of pressure on the individual saying, you're to blame for climate change. Why have you not stopped driving your car? And how can you possibly be using anything that's wrapped in plastic? Yes, of course, we should try to use our cars less and to use less plastic. Absolutely, I support those campaigns. But I say far more important is for us to understand the bigger picture and to come together to work at the community level. So change the I to a we. Change the I to a we in order to take action collectively. And that can mean pressuring the local government to change things so it becomes easier to use the car less. Perhaps through public transport, perhaps through more bicycle paths, perhaps through a more localizing, decentralizing development. Now, the normal discourse is, as I said, either focused on the individual or the national political choices. Are we going to vote to the left or to the right? And these are the political leaders we see on television or we hear about. We feel that we need to shift our gaze to understand better the global system. So we're sort of changing, not to say ignore the individual or ignore the political, but there are these other dimensions of the community level and the global level. So at the global level, partly what I was saying earlier is we need to be looking more consciously, more clearly at what is happening in this global marketplace. How is it that this global marketplace has been allowed to tell our countries to give global banks and corporations the power to run their countries? Now, with the help of the global media, with the help of many global institutions, this economic direction has essentially shaped politics in most countries, including my native country of Sweden, where the gap between rich and poor has been widening steadily, where the safety net for people, the welfare, the support has been lessened, and because of the widening gap between rich and poor, and because of the media, more and more people feel insecure, feel that they are not worthy if they're not global stars, if they're not filthy rich, they're nobody. So this gulf, this gap, is creating voters. It's creating voters that are tending to vote for the demagogues who say, vote for me, I'm going to make our country richer, I'm going to make our country great, I'm going to make you richer, we're going to get richer, we're going to be more competitive in the global economy. Vote for me. So we see a frightening shift in the vote around the world, and very often people who are considered left, again, whether in Sweden or in America, I don't want to speak for Korea, but I know that there are similar trends there. That even the left is tending to move to the right as the power of the global market, the power of global banks, linked to media corporations, linked to information technology, and linked to the military. There's a very frightening convergence in that global marketplace. As has been described by some Americans, the Pentagon linked to Wall Street, linked to Silicon Valley, creating now this new economic system that has more and more power to shape our ideas and to shape our politics. Now, this sounds very frightening, probably, and very negative. After COVID, this coming together of deregulated finance, deregulated technology, and a military competitive race has worsened. We have all been encouraged to become more dependent on our screens, more dependent on the idea that AI, that robots are desirable and a big step in the right direction. The message we're getting is that human beings have made a mess of this planet, and really robots will be more intelligent, more compassionate even. I hope that you will join me in questioning those assumptions. I hope that you'll be willing to step back without blaming any particular politicians, no particular companies, no particular individuals. This is a systemic part that's been growing and accelerating, and even the environmental and social activists have gone along with the fundamental assumptions. So it's really not about blaming and pointing the finger. It is about stepping back and painting a bigger picture to share with others and say, which direction do we want to go in, particularly after COVID? Now, the really good news is that there is another direction that's being created all over the world. And that is the direction we call localization. And COVID has helped that movement. So we've had both paths strengthened, a path away from nature, away from community, away from democracy, a path that encourages monoculture, top-down monoculture, biological and human. A path that encourages mass urbanization. Continued urbanization is a disaster. We need a better balance between urban and rural. We need to green our cities, we need urban gardens, but we need to strengthen smaller towns and cities. COVID has also strengthened smaller towns and cities. In many countries, in most countries, people have preferred to leave the big city to go to the smaller town, even to the village. They could see that it was healthier to be there. And what for me is the most wonderful thing is that everywhere in the world, we see a strengthened appreciation for food security. There's been the most wonderful effect that so many people have started recognizing the importance of swapping seeds, of becoming more self-reliant, more food secure. And most of it has been community-based. Many people have also started planting their own garden, but we have many examples of local farmers markets, even local restaurants and other local shops that have become food hubs, that have helped to make local fresh food available to people who needed it. So we've seen the strengthening and the emergence of a local food movement worldwide. When you look at the bigger picture, you will see that food is the most important aspect to focus on in the economy. The economy that has gone out of control and global has been treating food like a factory product. That's why it has been pushing animal factories and standardized monocultural production that kills the soil, that is not able to regenerate itself. The local food movement is about shorter distances between farm and consumer, perhaps with a shop in between, perhaps a co-op, many different forms of shortening distances and encouraging diversified production for regional and national needs. Many farmers markets that start will have a sort of absolute, and they'll say, we'll only buy things from 50 miles away. We in Local Future say, no, be pragmatic, look at the big picture. Perhaps you start even with something from your neighboring country, but you won't be buying fruit from Argentina in South Korea. Maybe you will buy some from Thailand. But the goal is to be aware and to look at how distances can shorten as production diversifies, with a goal of some meaningful optimal. And the optimal scale for what I call the 3 Fs, fishery, forestry, and farming. The optimal goal in today's world is going to be smaller is better. Now, small is beautiful. Small is necessary when it comes to the 3 Fs, because we need more eyes per unit of land. We need more people picking the fruit when it's ripe, not a robot coming along and picking every apple, ripe or not. We don't want to spend all that energy, all those resources, all those minerals to replace people on a crowded planet. We need now to look at technology in the service of humans. And particularly when it comes to farming, it's very, very important that we say, let's wait a minute, let's find a way of shifting taxes, subsidies, and regulations so that human labor is not artificially expensive and fossil fuels or other energy artificially cheap. The system we have today was based on this idea of cheap oil. The oil was never cheap. It led to world wars, it cost the lives of millions of people. And this is one of the inversions, one of the craziness that have allowed these long distances. And it's what has allowed the creation of unemployment and insecurity. And I also just want to add, I know I shouldn't be talking so much longer, but I just want to add that part of this global versus local is what's happened to money. Money used to be linked to something that people thought was valuable, but it has been progressively de-linked from gold, from the dollar, into a financial casino where private banks and financial institutions are allowed to create money. This is creating this huge bubble of money, which we are treating as real wealth. It is not real wealth. It is simply a political agreement to allow private banks to hold the power. Again, it's not about blame, it's about really stepping back and looking at that bigger picture and trying to work together across the boundaries of left and right, of environment and social, to just be willing to look at it and to speak out. We do have now real hope that COVID has led to such an awakening, particularly when it comes to local food, that we can start having this discussion about the real wealth, about the vital importance of healthy agriculture, and as I said, the 3 Fs, fishery, forestry, and farming. We can have a discussion about whether it makes sense to be so dependent on a global market. Why shouldn't we be producing more for ourselves? You know, we were hearing about face masks not being available in different countries. Well, that's unfortunate, but why on earth should we not be talking about producing our own apples and our own rice, our own meat, and doing it in a way that is genuinely healing to the land? And in order to do that, we do need to understand the bigger picture, the big economic picture. It's about more people. And, you know, in Ladakh, I saw that when you have the right ratio of people to land, the work is so easy. People worked a fraction of the time that we work, honestly. And if you talk to people my age, you will also hear we worked far less hard than you did. We were not nearly as pressured at university as you have been, or in school. The escalation, the pressure, the time pressure, and everyone being forced to regurgitate more information, more material, is leading to epidemics of nervous breakdowns among teachers, among doctors. And this is all pre-COVID. And it's all because of this economic juggernaut taking us more and more into a competitive, technology-based race instead of allowing more humans, more teachers to students, more farmers to every bit of land, more adults dealing with young people. It takes time to nurture, to care, to love. We need to slow down. We need to scale down to do the things that are really important to us, to care for each other, to have a re-established relationship between young and old, to reawaken to the connection between our mind, our heart, and our bodies. All of these trends are happening, particularly in industrial society. There's an awakening. There's a longing for that more holistic, reconnected way of being. You will see in therapy, there's a shift towards somatic therapy, understanding the role of the body in remembering trauma, in having a memory, in having an intelligence. All of these things point in that direction of scaling down, slowing down, respecting diversity. We can only do that if we decentralize or localize. We can only respect the seed that likes to grow in a dry soil or in a clay soil. We can only respect the individual human being with their individual needs if we move away from techno systems of monoculture towards much more individual caring, taking the time to care, taking the time to see and hear each other. This coming together, this slowing down, this coming together and slowing down is happening. And it's happening more after COVID. And I really believe, and I'm not alone in believing, that we have a very good chance now to raise awareness about the big picture, about being clear about the choice. If I do this, if I support this idea, am I supporting a path away from nature, away from community? Or if I support something else, am I supporting something that is genuinely healing of nature, of community, and of myself? The localizing path, which is at the deepest level about connection, reconnection between human beings and between human beings and nature, is a path that is demonstrating that it can create well-being for both nature and humans. For instance, in the local food movement, when people come together and start creating that shorter distance between the farm and the consumer, suddenly the local market is encouraging diversity on the land. In a local market, no one is wanting a ton of identical carrots. The farmer will make more money if he grows some lettuces and maybe brings some eggs as well, maybe even some meat or cheese. The diversity is actually profitable in the localized economies. What's also really wonderful is that from the foundation in local food movements, which are really growing everywhere, very rapidly, under different labels. Permaculture is one of them, agroecology, biodynamic, agroforestry. More recently, what's being used is regenerative agriculture. But be careful that all of these terms, but especially regenerative, You need to be insisting on a holistic view, because regenerative may only talk about carbon and may suit big business too much. So we need to be talking about diversity and shorter distances. That's what is structurally what's needed. It's more meaningful than just saying regenerative. But what's happening is that this foundation of local food has also led to local business alliances, to local energy, community initiatives. Local governments have started responding to the movement from the bottom up, all around the world, also in Korea. Local governments have become responsive to the needs of people and nature. Not all of them and not enough, but there's a very exciting trend there that you can see in every country. And I think if we also become aware of the local finance movement, my friend Michael Schumann is one of the leaders in the world of finding strategies for local community initiatives to finance the rebooting and the recreation of local economic structures. And you can see more meaningful work, more community, less energy consumption, generally less resource consumption, more meaningful livelihoods, more community. One of the examples we often use is that a study showed that when people shop at the farmers market, the local farmers market, they have 10 times more conversations with each other than they do in the supermarket. And this is just one of the many, many benefits. And many of the changes that are happening are subconscious. Many people who are involved in these changes are not aware of the broader systemic picture that I'm talking about. But we need people like you to help us articulate and spell out more clearly these different paths, the systemic paths facing us now. And it's very clear to me that most of the grassroots initiatives in the localization movement have been initiated by women. That's why I'm particularly pleased to be talking to you today. I'm really honored, and I do hope to stay in touch with you. I hope we'll be collaborating for our big event next year. Again, we will be running World Localization Day. So we've launched this as a world movement to show that all around the world, there are localization projects and initiatives growing. And it becomes very, very empowering, very inspiring when you realize how many people want to have more community, want to slow down, want to feel more connected, want to feel also more seen and heard and appreciated. That's what happens in the human scale. And you see how people around the world are saying the same thing. It gives you faith in humanity. Please do look at our World Localization Day program from this year, June 21st. It's on our website, localfutures.org. And I really hope to be in touch with you, before that. But I think that Eva University might want to collaborate with us for next June's program, which will be mainly online. But if it's possible in different countries, there will also be face-to-face activities. But there is a lot that we can do online, just as we're doing today. Sorry for giving such a long talk, and I hope now we will have time for some questions. So thank you all very much. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Director Norberg-Hutch. That was truly an inspiring talk that gave us a lot to think about especially the way we've been increasingly rely on this exploitative structure of modern economy. After hearing your talk, I realized that I was also unwitting part of the problem. So I think this will, provide a ground shift movement to move towards the other side and be a part of the solution. And I for one, was truly convinced by the way in which your diagnosis of this modern economy was based on your first-hand experience of Ladakh. And I wish you had more time to talk about that experience. For me, it was really, really educational, and it was full of insights about how that local the indigenous culture and society was shifting in a very negative direction after they were impacted by this global trade. So anyway, and I won't take up any more of this time. That should go to our students who are eager to ask questions, who are with us today. There are 4 students who I think want to ask questions one at a time. Is that correct? Okay. Shall we start with Han Ji-hye, who's joining us from the educational technology. Is that correct?
Hi, Professor Helena. My name is Ji-hye Han from Ewha Women's University, and I'm majoring in educational technology. And I'm also pursuing the career of global development cooperation in education field. So I want to ask you some questions about in classroom level creating local community thing. And I generally deeply agree with the idea that you're emphasizing the localization. But I think it will be a little hard for South Korea to actually implement the big picture activism idea. So my question is that if we really want to create general discourse, what we can do in classroom level, and also if people are gathered who are deeply sharing the mindset of localization, what we can do for that activism idea. Thank you.
Well, I think the most important thing that you can do is to read about all the various initiatives that are happening. And also in Korea, I mean, you have been, like I said, remarkable at reading so much from the rest of the world. You've translated so many books from other countries, but perhaps not as many as you should when it comes to localization. Because so often the localization books, the films, the initiatives, they're very small scale, and there are lots of them. But I think once you really inform yourself about what's happening and you hear about the testimony of people who are part of these projects, how they've managed to do it in an industrialized country, in a country very similar to South Korea, I think then you'll be able to feel convinced that you can make a difference in South Korea and you can start taking initiatives, actually doing practical projects at the community level. And then at the same time, as you put the bigger picture out there into the world, there will be a movement that will start wanting to see political change. There's an interesting political initiative in England where a local council has become totally localist. All the councillors now don't belong to any political party except to represent their own town. It's a town called Frome in the UK, Frome.
Okay, thank you very much. The next student. Next student, Kim Min-kyung.
Hello, my My name is Min-kyung Kim, and I'm freshman of Hokkuma College of General Education. And my question is, what should we do to prevent the second COVID situation in the future?
A second COVID situation.
To
Yeah.
prevent that.
To prevent another COVID pandemic. Yeah.
Yes, yes.
Yeah. Yeah, well, it's very, very difficult to know what to do. I mean, obviously, we need to be paying attention to trying to keep as responsible as possible. We need to, I think also we need to be standing up for meaningful regulations. It's been very unfortunate. I don't know if that's happening in South Korea, but in many countries, the regulations have been very counterproductive. They've actually prevented people from going outside, when being outside in nature would have been the best thing to stay healthy, to get some sunshine, to get fresh air, and insisting that people wear masks when they're out in nature without close contact with other people. There are ways, I think, that these regulations can be humanized and can be made more intelligent so that people won't be so angry at them, because there's been an angry reaction in many countries. And then, of course, there is much speculation that the real problem is how we are treating the natural world. So in the broadest, big picture analysis, again, it comes back to how do we really quickly turn away from any of the invasive practices into wilderness and into manipulating species in ways that simply should not be done. How do we move away from any type of factory farming? How do we move away from destroying the healthy viruses in the soil that are needed? We have had a very clumsy, a very stupid and inefficient way of dealing with the natural world, particularly in farming and of course in animal factories and so on. In the whole food production and transport of food and so on has been a disaster. You've probably seen the terrible effects of workers in these factory conditions, particularly working with animal products. But the solution is not to say no animal products. The solution is to understand the big picture, the respect for diversity, the respect for smaller scale, and then move away from this large scale, monocultural, very destructive impact on wilderness, on the soil, on our health. We are all much more vulnerable because our health is not as strong as it should be because of this unnatural way that we've been living. We need, part of the solution also is to now support smaller towns and cities so that we don't keep, when we know that the big city was the most difficult and most dangerous place to be in this pandemic, we need to support people to find lives in smaller towns and cities. This is part of the localization path. It's part of the path that we need to increase productivity while reducing the ecological footprint. And I should have mentioned this earlier as part of the two paths. The global path for agriculture has made us more and more inefficient. In a big monoculture, you can never produce as much food as you can when you have many small farms. So if you have one farm with 1,000 acres and you have 10 farms with 100 acres, those 10 farms providing diversity will always be more productive. Much, much more food per acre of land, per unit of water. So to become more productive and to replenish nature, we need to start this localizing path. And starting that quickly is part of preventing more pandemics.
Okay, thank you very much. The next question.
Hello, and my name is Ji Choi, and I'm from the Department of English Language and Literature in Yihua Women's University. First of all, thank you for your wonderful lecture, and it gave me an opportunity to think about the relation between individuals' health and social issues, and also I think the diversity in the collaboration between diversity and localization, it was really impressive for me among the lecture. So from this lecture, I want to ask you one question about the future network among not only between individuals, but among major countries all around the world toward the upcoming post-COVID-19 situation. Since I strongly believe the cooperation among human beings globally is also essential to make a better future. And I also hope to hear your opinion about this issue. And moreover, I wish to know about some past events that took place in the past that you think is very nice precedent for people in modern society to follow. Thank you.
Yes, as I said before, we very much believe in the need for international collaboration, deeper dialogue, and real exchange and support. And this is what's happening in the localization movement, particularly as we have been promoting it. Some people are not so aware that the exchange of news and information is vital, partly to show people that this is something that is happening and, real people doing real things that are bringing benefit. So gathering all that information and seeing that it's working and increasing, the numbers are increasing all the time. We do not have the amount of funding and the amount of research that is needed. However, that's beginning to grow also. So there will be so much more evidence once there is more funding for the research to show how much is happening worldwide and to facilitate this exchange. Ideally, in the future, we will be able to also have more international meetings and conferences, and we will be able to have more exchange programs. I have taught with several colleges where international exchange has been part of it, and we found it extremely helpful and productive, and particularly when you have people from both the industrialized, more urbanized world and so-called land-based, less developed countries. That exchange becomes extremely important. So I think in terms of past events that we could point to, we were running international conferences around the world, about 20 of them in Tokyo. We also have in South Korea, in Jeonju. We've been having international conferences for the last 6 years. And we have also been doing conferences in the UK, in Australia, and Italy, and in many countries in the US. And those, again, have been international speakers coming together and bringing a perspective that then people from the region, when they hear about this other path, when they hear there is a systemic path that needs to be better understood and that if implemented can bring so many benefits, it has led to a lot of activities that have been very beneficial. And, for instance, one of our speakers on World Localization Day is a writer of a book called Lost Connections. His name is Johan Hari, and he's someone who suffered from severe depression for many years. He was put on drugs, on the conventional pharmaceutical drugs, and was not getting better. And his path to recovery was about realizing that he had been too isolated, too cut off. And he realized, as he spoke to researchers and therapists around the world, that it was this reconnection between people and nature that was healing. And he gives a beautiful example, which is just exactly why the local food movement is so important. You know, one of the cases was some patients who were all suffering from depression. And when they started to grow a garden together and they turned the soil into productive, healthy soil, they reported, as the garden blossomed, so did they. And that's a beautiful example of how healing the local food movement is in terms of the human healing. And at the same time, as I say, it literally increases the productivity. You can get more yield out of a bit of land if you diversify than you ever can do with monoculture. And that fact is something that we need to be getting out more widely. I'm going away from your question, but it's all related.
Thank you very much. And next student, I believe.
Thank you. Hi, Ms. Norberg. For me, it's really a pleasure to be here present with you. My name is Shirin. I'm actually an international student. I'm from Mexico. I'm Iranian Mexican. I'm here in the Division of International Studies, and I'm also majoring in law back in my country. And well, I've been following your work for quite a couple of years, and I was really interested in a point that you brought up about our taxes and how pretty much us are subsidizing the mechanism that have brought our economy to the current status quo, considering, economic gap, dilution of GPA growth, among others. And well, I was wondering, how is COVID-19 going to affect our economy post-COVID, considering again the issue of taxes, economic gap, dilution of GDP growth, along with other current economic system that has caused people to be unhappy. But mainly, I want to focus my question on third world countries, like less developed countries like mine, because I understand that there's a difference between the development in Korea and the development in countries like mine.
But you want to focus on Mexico or on South Korea?
A comparison between both would be interesting to understand how it would affect each one differently.
Yeah, well, in both cases, the country's economy has been shaped by this belief that production for export is beneficial to the home country. And in both cases, it actually has had a very destructive effect. Now, the destructive effect in a place like South Korea or in Sweden may not be so obvious to many people, but it's becoming more and more obvious. And of course, from our international work, it's very clear that in those more industrialized, urbanized countries, people have far less time. They are pressured much harder. Time has become the most valuable commodity. They're cut off from intergenerational care and connection. This cutting off from old and young and the separation and splitting down into smaller and smaller families has taken a huge toll on well-being. The separation from nature, from being in a more rural setting or a smaller town, has also come at a huge price. Now, to see that clearly, you do need to go back to a place like Ladakh as a baseline. Not again to say that Ladakh traditionally was perfect, but so many things that in Mexico today mean that there is real poverty and there isn't necessarily such a thriving community connection, because people there for generations have been pressured by colonial forces and later development forces. But remember, the colonial forces were doing the same thing. They were forcing an extractive monocultural production. that depleted the land, that used the people for this trading, monopolistic economy. So I think there are ways in which the more industrialized and the more supposedly progressive countries, including Sweden, on the surface look as though they've really benefited. But as I say, when you look more deeply, you will often find more serious trauma there, more serious psychological, spiritual problems, and more addiction, more serious human breakdown than you will in the less industrialized countries. Now, how to change it? We can, I believe, build up a movement relatively quickly if people understand that we're not talking about the conventional idea of changing the economy. We're talking about a very simple restructuring where systematically we can start a path towards diversification and towards employing more people and using less energy, technology, and imported materials. If that's done in a systematic way, the benefits become apparent very quickly. And that's what's happening in the small scale and localization initiatives. But we need to get the word out about that to build up the political pressure to go beyond, it's good that local governments are beginning to change, but we need that change at the national level. We need to be telling our political leaders that we expect them to go back around the same table where they are sitting and handing over power to multinational banks and corporations, to instead collaborate between national governments to together as a group say, we are going to regulate you now. You're going to have to choose over a certain period, if you're going to be South Korean or Japanese or American, you can no longer have the freedom to go in and out and sue us if we don't do what you want. We are going to be setting the rules because democratic process will determine the rules for business. Democratic process. The general public needs to have a choice. Do you want to subsidize the whole economy in such a way that chemical food is cheaper than organic food? Do you want to subsidize the economy so that there are fewer jobs? Do you want to subsidize an economy that creates essentially ill health? Do you want to subsidize only high-tech medicine, or would you like to subsidize preventative medicine that is about health, not just treating illness? So in my book, Local is Our Future, I talk a little bit more about that. And that book, by the way, is available in Korean.
Okay, thank you very much. We've been going on for 90 minutes, hour and a half, and you must be very exhausted from, giving us such a passionate discourse about how important it is for us to come together to fight this frame of global economy that has been driven by this neoliberalist discourse. As you know, we are joined by other students who are attending this lecture remotely. We have this, on this floor, we have this big screen. I wonder whether you can see this big screen with all these students in a Zoom that are very, very serious and paying attention to your lecture. And some of them, I can see them, they're taking notes from your lecture. So you can see how you have become very influential within the last 90 minutes. So if I can tax your patience just a little bit, there are also these 3 questions coming from the students. So this question is coming from a student, Che Hae-rin, who is in the Department of Education. And this is a question. You are a leading figure in the field of anti-globalization and environment protection. Do you believe that the level of globalization will decrease and that localization will take root as a consequence of the current social distancing and the closing of borders around the world? So, and what are your opinions on the rapid development of online communication tools such as Zoom? And I think it's a very moot question.
Well, I think that there is a chance that governments will wake up to the need to reduce their dependence on global traders and trade and to take back more democratic power. But I think the process will happen because there is already a grassroots movement that is writing about this, speaking out, and beginning to have an impact. And when I talk about grassroots, I'm really talking about how in virtually every institution, within the World Bank, within most corporations, within most universities, there are individuals who are saying, this doesn't make sense, this is not helpful for people and planet. I want to support what I believe in. So you have these alternative voices who are making, coming up with an opposing view and beginning to support this coming back to genuine health and well-being for people and planet. So this is happening, and I think COVID has, not so much because of the social distancing or so on, but I think there's been a real wake-up, partly as people were looking at what was happening. They became concerned about their health, they became concerned about local food. All around the world, there were many very wonderful signs, even in America, maybe especially in America. There were self-organizing community groups that manages to connect, even though they couldn't meet, very often over Zoom or so on, to help each other and to make sure that if there were aged people who needed help with shopping, if there were people who couldn't afford to buy the local food, they were supporting them. So there was a very clear sign that people are waking up and that they want to do something that's beneficial for their own communities, for themselves, and for nature. I think that is the big hope, is that will grow and that will continue, and that we all help to communicate that, to speak about it, to write about it, to make films about it. That is big picture activism. Now, with Zoom, that has become a very important tool for big picture activism right now. We need to be sophisticated enough to understand the paradox that even though Zoom may be one of the best ways to communicate right now, we do not want to encourage an even greater dependence on the screen, if not necessary. We should be using the internet and the tools we have to argue for a pause button, to say we don't want 5G. I understand you probably have a lot of it in South Korea already. We don't want to take a huge leap into even faster communication, because remember, the faster communication is facilitating the voices promoting consumerism, war, and even terrorism. It's promoting the voices that are abusing children sexually and the trade in sex slaves. It is a tool that is just as useful for the dark forces as for the good. And in fact, I would say probably more so. So at the moment, it's an important tool. We need to use it, but let's use that tool to discuss why it is that we don't want to go even faster and even more competitive, even more monocultural. And we don't want to use scarce minerals and scarce energy sources in order to replace people. And that's what these technologies are doing. So we need to use technology, and then we need to look at, once there's more of a critical mass, we need to look at where to use these technologies really importantly for climate, and for disaster relief. These tools are very valuable, but they are not valuable when it comes to allowing banks and ag and pharmaceutical corporations to use the tools and to have far, far more effective tools than we do, to have teams of engineers, in the in Wall Street and so on, they've already, managed to change things so they have a lead in terms of the speed of their technological communication worldwide for the global market. We want to decommercialize the web, and we want to move in a direction where that decommercialization will allow more of us to spend more time in direct contact with one another and with nature. And let's remember that it's that healthy contact with nature which is going to be healing nature as well. The robots are not going to be healing nature. It's human beings that are needed for that.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, the next question comes from Park Hae-in from Echo Media, Department of Echo Media. And this is her question. Sometimes it sounds ideal to solve both environmental and class problems through environmental justice. Yellow vest protests were held in France due to the rise in oil content. And some Jeju native, Jeju Island here in South Korea, who have lived consistently with feelings of local alienation, agree to build a new Jeju airport. What are the prerequisites for climate justice when implementing policies right now? Or what care should we be taken to ensure that the individual policies do not seem to exacerbate inequalities?
Well, again, in order to look at that honestly, we need the big picture. We've got to step back. Much of the discussion of environmental justice is assuming that these big businesses and building airports and so on is creating jobs, and that it's the only way to create jobs. This is fraudulent. It's a path that overall is destroying more jobs than it's creating. But to see that, and to see how in a particular instance, it may not look so clear, because yes, there may be a big company coming in to build an airport or to build large-scale infrastructure projects that for a while will create work. But when you study it worldwide, you see this is part of an escalation that as an interlinked system is much more destructive of livelihoods, particularly of livelihoods that are meaningful, enjoyable, and regenerating and healing the earth, regenerating and healing the real economy. Everything we use comes from nature. And as this energy, techno-intensive system is allowed to expand, we are decimating nature. We're eliminating species. We mustn't look just at climate change as the only issue. So climate justice can also be constructed in a way that doesn't give us the whole picture. The climate issue is far too focused on carbon and far too narrowly and focused in a way that suits big business, that doesn't address the issue of importing and exporting the same product. That would be the easiest way to reduce emissions, to just stop importing apples if you grow apples. Keep your own apples, leave the apples over there. But that's not even being discussed. So again, I would argue, whether it's climate justice or almost anything else, we need to go back a few steps to look more deeply and more holistically to see the systemic path. And when I say global versus local, remember, it's systemically, it's about further urbanization versus supporting smaller towns and villages. It's about more technology and rapid technological change versus now a sort of pause button to say, let's examine which technologies we really need as a society. Let's look at who is it who says we need driverless cars? Why do we need driverless cars? Where does that come from? Did that come from people or from big business? Genetically modified food, who thought that up? Not an individual, it comes out of a systemic commercialization. So again, the two paths have to do with monoculture versus diversity, with more speed and competition versus slowing down and more collaboration not in a overly idealistic, blind way, but these localization initiatives are engendering more collaborative structures. And it has to do, as I said again, with thinking we need more and more energy while we're dumping human beings. Remember, human beings are the most abundant, overabundant, renewable resource we have. And they're just being dumped in favor of using scarce minerals and destroying whole countries with the mining for those minerals, and then creating tools that every year have to be upgraded, and the toxic pollution that comes from dumping them in countries out of sight. So there's a lot to think about, but it's a basic rethink that doesn't take that long. And when you accompany it with an experiential coming together to build more community and connection, and that means also remembering that all cultures virtually on this planet, we used to sing and dance and make music together. This is one of the glues of society that has existed for thousands of years. Now in the modern screen age, we just sit and listen to the stars and we forget how to sing. We're afraid to sing. That is an emblematic difference between the global versus the local part. In the local part, people are starting to sing together. They don't have to be perfect. In the global part, we listen to this famous global star and that global star who earn $1 million a minute or whatever. The localizing part is free and for people just to come together and to enjoy.
Okay, thank you very much. And in response, I just like to tell you that South Korea is a country of singers. If you just give, people a microphone, they will just stand up and sing out of no reason. That more or less concludes all the questions we have from students. And thank you very much for joining us at such a late late hour in your country, in Australia. And do you have any last comments that you'd like to leave us with, or?
Yes, I think it was wonderful that you reminded me how much people sing in Korea.
Yes.
And I think that for me, Korea is one of the most interesting and potentially the country that will lead the way, because you haven't lost so much of your traditional fabric as, for instance, my native Sweden or England or America, where that practice of singing together was lost much longer ago, and where the sort of memory of both community and connection to nature is further removed. You industrialized very, very rapidly and in a very extreme way. You know, you were pushed into high-rise cities, living in these high-rise blocks, and you've developed a real sense of longing for connection with nature and community.
Right.
And like I say, you still have that memory. So I'm very, very happy to be as involved with Korean friends and colleagues as I am. And I want to do everything to encourage this movement to grow. You have you have a very special intelligence also, like I said earlier. You are able to be very, very analytical, but also holistic. This is something that is more rare in the Anglo world, where the more narrow, left brain, analytical approach has been pursued for much longer. Somehow you still have a memory in a place like South Korea. So I'm very, very happy to be speaking to you, and I hope to stay in touch and continue our collaboration.
Thank you very much. That was
Thank
wonderful. Round of big applause for Helena. Okay, thank you very much. Last but not least, the Professor Chung Jae-young, the Dean of Hokkuma College of General Education, will be delivering a short message to close our event.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Sin. Good afternoon. This is Jae-young Jung, Dean of Hokkuma College of General Education at Ewha Women's University. First of all, I would like to thank you, Director Helena Norbert-Hoji, and all of our guests for staying with us until this late time for this meaningful event today. As the Dean, I would like to briefly introduce Hokkuma College of General Education, the host of today's event. Hokkuma is the Hebrew word for true wisdom from the Old Testament. Hokkuma College was established with the aim of researching general education and nurturing talent of the new era. On the basis of IHWA's 130 years tradition of fostering educated, wise talent with a sound character. I always believed the humanity has not met the expectations of Director Norbert-Hoji, who has long spoken of the dangers of neoliberal globalization, emphasizing the value and importance of the local movement. However, while attending to today's lecture, I thought for a moment that nature may have directly rebuked human arrogance and put brakes on greedy globalization through a tough consequence called COVID-19. As Director Norbert-Hoji said, humanity is now at a crossroads of choosing whether to act or not to act. As an older generation, I am so sorry to be leaving behind such a huge responsibility to our student, new generations, who will be living in the 21st century. However, it is a relief indeed that if a student who attended this lecture will now be able to critically reflect upon human civilization and the transition to an ecological civilization through the experience of COVID-19. I would like to once again express my deep respect and gratitude to Director Helena Norbert-Hoji for giving such a valuable lecture from far away. We promise to do our best with Korean and Mexican to do our best to make IHWA an institution of education and research where students can freely imagine and realize what we can do in such times of an ecological crisis. Actually, I read your books more than 20 years ago, so I received lots of insight to your books. And last year, I read your books again, new book. Yeah, so actually, I forgot your insight for a long time. And last year, I listened to your message from your book. Thank you so much, Director Hoji and Professor Sin and other attendants. Thank you for your attention. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Pleasure to meet you.
Thank you for staying with us in late hours. And thank you for your great talk for these 2 hours. It will stay with us
Thank you.
for a long time to come. Okay.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Bye.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Thank
Bye.
you.